5 things that you maybe didn't know about chainmail. Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. Now, at the outset, I'm going to say this should be called mail, not chainmail. I know that some of you out there get triggered when I say chainmail, but obviously YouTube, we're appealing to a mass audience here, so chainmail, people know what that is. If I just say mail, they might get confused. So I'm in the process of cleaning all of my gear, including my plate armor, my harness, because I'm just back. Wow, that's still soggy inside that helmet. I'm just back from the massive reenactment of the Battle of Tewkesbury, which happens every year here in England. It was an awesome event. You might notice I'm a bit more tanned than I was before. It was incredibly hot. It was 33 degrees Celsius on Saturday. It was a little bit cooler, about 29 on Sunday, but anyway, it was very, very hot. Hard going. Not everybody made it. A lot of people flagging from heat exhaustion in armour. It's a real thing. We'll probably talk about that in a future video. But I thought, given that I'm cleaning my gear and I'm looking at my mail, I've got various different pieces of mail here, all different types of mail, and it's very important to say there are different types of mail. Not all mail or chainmail is the same. There's different sized links, there's different cross section of links. Some are round, some are flat. Different types of riveting, some is fully riveted, some is alternating between solid and riveted. Many different variations which we're not going to cover here, but there are overall 5 things which came straight to me while I was cleaning my mail, or attempting to, and looking at it, that made me realise there are probably 5 things right here that quite a lot of you didn't know about chainmail. So the first thing is that when you're in armour and you're fighting, even in winter but especially in summer, you sweat, and when you sweat, that's obviously predominantly water. Water isn't the best friend of iron and steel, it rusts it. And indeed, you can see on my collar, which goes around my neck here, you can probably just about see on the camera there, I've got some brown staining around here, which is rust. Okay, now, before we talk about the effects of that or how to deal with it, the important thing I want to point out is that mail or chainmail is often not attached to any fabric or leather, but sometimes it is. And whether you're an artist or you're writing books or you're just interested in living history, you should know that it basically rusts where the leather or fabric is attached, because that's where the moisture adheres to. Down here, it basically runs off, and especially when your body's warm or when it's hot weather, it doesn't really get time to rust before it dries. But up here where it lingers around these straps and around the collar edge, or if there's any fabric attached to it or padding or things like that, anything that kind of wicks and holds that moisture is going to make it rusty in those places. So by and large, you only really want to attach leather or fabric to mail when you really have to for some purpose of padding or wearing. Other than that, you try and avoid it. So point number 2 is, how do you clean mail? Well, I know there's lots of children's books of the medieval knight and things like that which talk about putting these into barrels of sand and rolling them around. You could do that, but one of the really interesting things about mail is it's kind of self-cleaning. Now that is because it scours itself. The very act of moving means that every ring abrades the rings around it. And that means that if you have rust on your mail, you can literally just, I mean, you could put it in like a cement mixer, you could put it in a barrel and have your squire roll it around. But the very act of moving mail, so if you wear it often, it tends to self-clean. So I think most people don't realise that mail armour, so long as it's used rather than left in a heap in a corner or in a wet place, if it's used and worn and moved around, this is literally, while you're watching on camera, self-cleaning it. Now, one exception to that is areas that don't move very much, like up here. And what I personally use is a brass wire brush, and that kind of gets into the nooks and crannies. But the headline here is that overall, mail is self-cleaning. Now, the third point, if I pick up a different bit of mail that I wear, these are my voiders. That's what goes inside my armpit. This is finer quality mail than the other mail we were looking at there. Very nicely tailored, very nicely made, because we've got to have this gusseting in here so that I can move my arms freely. This type of mail, or indeed any type of mail, no matter how good it is at the start, actually gets more supple with age. Why would that be? Well, quite simply, for the same reason that mail is self-cleaning. When mail is worn and moves around, it lightly abrades. It's a bit like, you know, slightly eroding, slightly almost sanding itself, and it makes all of the corners and edges more smooth, those little rivets that protrude. Every single one of those over time and over the course of years gets smoothed down, and as it gets smoothed down, the mail rolls over itself more freely and more easily. So as mail gets older, it can actually get better. It's absolutely amazing. And in fact, people who are making really top-end mail actually go to some effort to actually polish and abrade and smooth the links so that they actually kind of roll over and kind of move around each other more freely and more supplely. This means that really good quality mail like this is usually pretty damn supple when you get it, but even this will become more supple with age. But cheaper mail, and most mail is made in India these days, although a lot of it is still handmade in Europe as well at a higher cost, but the cheaper Indian mail can be a little bit stiff and a little bit sort of abrasive when you first get it, but it will get better with age and wearing as all of those corners and edges get smoothed down. Now, the fourth point about mail, which is best exhibited by this mail skirt here, which is what covers my crotch, and you need this here because of course you can't have plate in anywhere where you need to sit on a horse, for example, so you have to have mail in there. You need to have some fabric, kind of flexible defense, which is mail is fantastic for that. So even in the age of plate, mail is still of course very important. And one thing which will be only too obvious to people that have worn mail, particularly the cheaper mail, but might not be obvious to those of you who've just seen pictures of mail, reenactors, maybe movies, whatever, historic artwork, is that mail really freaking chafes. And I can tell you, I literally have, I won't subject you to them right now, but I have marks and abrasions on my body at this very moment from the weekend as a result of wearing mail. If you've got a layer of fabric underneath, even a shirt or your hose, which are like the trousers, that will protect you. So one layer of fabric will protect you from that abrasion. But let's say your shirt gets pulled out of your hose and you have a little bit of bare skin, as I did, and you have this mail resting against your skin as you move around with the mail on top, with the plate on top, and the plate grinding this into your skin. It really hurts, it's really annoying, and even when you're on your full plate harness and people are hitting you on the plates with weapons and stuff, which doesn't really hurt most of the time, you can feel this biting into your flesh, and it's horrible. So for that reason, next time you see someone in a movie or a TV show wearing mail on bare skin, like a mail coif on the head, for example, which we see quite a bit in movies, a mail coif on the head but with no arming cap underneath it, it's freaking stupid. It doesn't offer any protection because if they received a hit there, it would just go straight into the person's cranium because you don't have any padding or even fabric underneath to protect from it. But also just wearing it is incredibly abrasive and horrible. Now, admittedly, with smoother, as we talked about before, with smoother and more smaller links, smoother links, more professionally, higher quality made links, they will be less abrasive, but they're still abrasive, and any kind of bony bits like your collarbones or shoulders or elbows and things like this, it will really dig into unless you have something under there for comfort. But it doesn't need to be padded necessarily, can just be clothing. So this clothing is usually good enough so long as there's no bare skin underneath. So headline here, mail chafes on skin, stick some fabric underneath it. So the last point we're going to look at here actually relates to testing of mail, and this is very interesting to me anyway, people who are interested in things like Todd's arrows versus armour tests and stuff like this. There is a huge difference between cheap mail and expensive mail, but also just between different types of mail as well. So for example, we get references to double riveted mail, but we equally know, obviously, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's mail of different size rings, different thickness of the gauge of the rings, different cross section, so round versus flat, having all of the rings riveted versus having alternate rows of solid versus riveted, this kind of thing. So one of the things we find when we test mail is that the common failure point of most commercially available modern mail is the rivet. Okay, so if you have a ring here, you overlap the two ends of the ring and you rivet through there with one rivet, and that is a weak point. The rest of the ring is generally stronger than that riveted point. But here's the final point, here's the news flash. on really good quality mail, and particularly historically accurate made mail, of which there isn't a huge amount commercially available, it has to be said, sometimes on that really good mail, the riveted point, the join point, is actually stronger than the rest of the ring. So when we test modern commercially available chainmail mail, then the weak point is pretty much always the rivet crossover. However, on some historical mail, that can actually be the strongest point. Why is this? Quite simply because they thicken up the gauge of the wire to provide an overlap layer. They put a very good and thin rivet in. Sometimes it's wedge riveted, sometimes it's just a pin rivet. And that actually ends up as a stronger point than the rest of the wire of the ring. So weirdly, we can make this sweeping statement about, oh, the weak point of mail is the riveted point, but on some mail, that's completely the opposite, and that's actually the strong point. So, as always with historical things, it's dangerous to make sweeping generalizations without a little bit more context, and that's what I'm here to do, to bring you the context, folks. Anyway, I hope that's been interesting. I have been Matt Easton. I will hopefully be again next time, and I hope that you'll be there to see it. Take care, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.